It's time for another episode of Creepy Archaeology. Today I want to introduce you to a disgusting vial of holy blood. I'm also exploring the truth of medieval plague doctors and a giant Roman skeleton, the Roman giant. This is the skeleton of a giant. It's not a fake, it's not a fraud. This is the skeletal body of a man who stood 6'8" during the 3rd century AD. He was just uncovered near Rome. How tall do you think people were 2,000 years ago? If you were an average man living in the Roman Empire, you probably stood about 5'6". Now imagine a person who stood over a foot taller than his fellow Roman citizens. He would have been looked up at like a freak of nature, or maybe as a demigod. It's hard to say what people would have thought back then. Could he have belonged to a race of real giants? The answer is absolutely not. Scientists have already analyzed his remains and confirmed him as suffering from gigantism. It's the first official ancient skeleton of someone with the affliction. Other examples have been found in Poland and Egypt, but not 100% confirmed. Scientists at the University of Pisa say this is the first clear case. The massive grave was first found in 1991. Excavations at a small necropolis in Fidene revealed a tomb so huge the archaeologists were flabbergasted. But because it was in the 90s, no tests were done on the bones. They were stashed away until scientists took a look at them recently. Using sophisticated technology, the team examined the skeleton. They found his bones were still growing in early adulthood, which is obvious evidence of gigantism. They also found skull damage consistent with a pituitary tumor. These tumors are associated with the pituitary gland, which causes an overproduction of growth hormones in people with gigantism. This guy likely died between the age of 16 and 20, and sadly he wasn't part of an elite race of warrior giants. He just had a disease that made him huge. Saint Janarius's blood. Janarius was born around 1700 years ago. He's the patron saint of the Italian city of Naples. 3 times a year, a small vial of his blood is brought out to the public as part of an extremely creepy ceremony. Out of all the weird Christian relics, Saint Janarius's blood is one of the most outrageous. On September 19th every year, the Catholic Church celebrates his feast. Then there's the first Sunday in May that commemorates the transfer of his corpse to Naples. And lastly, the anniversary of Mount Vesuvius's eruption on December 16th, 1631. Legend has it, Naples was only narrowly spared from certain doom thanks to the invocation of Janarius's name. On these 3 holy days, the glass vial of the saint's dried blood is taken from its resting place and shown to the people. When it happens, a miracle is seen by all those in attendance. His blood is dried for the rest of the year, then suddenly liquefies during these 3 traditional celebrations. Documentation shows the miracle has been taking place since at least 1389 every single year. What do I mean, liquefies? Well, the blood has been in a glass vial, presumably for 1700 years. It's a solid red mass, as it should be. But on the 3 holy days, the solid mass starts to bubble. It takes anywhere from 2 minutes to a few days, but soon enough it becomes liquid. The church claims it's a very real miracle, and to be honest, it might be. There have been several failed investigations throughout the years. Scientists still don't understand how a solid hunk of blood suddenly bubbles and turns into a liquid. Do you have any ideas? And now for number 7, but first it's shout-out time. I wanted to give a big thank you to Joker Locuson and Tandmo8429 for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like these. Secrets of the Plague Doctor. Out of all the creepy symbols from the Middle Ages, none inspires fear quite like the mask of the Plague Doctor. But where does the Plague Doctor mask come from, and what was it even used for? To understand, I need to take you back to the days of plague and pestilence. In medieval Europe, plague was a very real issue. The 14th century saw the pandemic we now call the Black Death. Anywhere from a quarter to about half of everyone in Europe died from the sickness. In villages, towns, and cities, public servants were hired as plague doctors when sickness started to spread. These were doctors dedicated to specifically treating victims of the plague. They were also charged with burying the dead, which surely would have been a horrendous task. They did other things too, like document the final words of their patients, testify the readings of wills, and count the dead. Sometimes plague doctors even conducted autopsies. It was all part of understanding what the plague was and why it killed everybody. But what about their creepy masks? Plague doctors didn't start wearing a uniform until 1619. Charles de Lorme, who had acted as chief physician for a trio of French kings, came up with the idea for a plague suit. It was to protect plague doctors from the disease of their patients. There was a leather hat that indicated the person was a doctor. Beneath the hat was a mask with a beak. The beaked mask was to keep germs out of the wearer's mouth. Even in the 1600s, doctors understood the benefit of masking themselves to stay safe. The reason the masks had a beak was because many people thought birds were spreading the plague. Also, the beak was usually hollow and could be stuffed full of rose petals or mint. This helped the plague doctor deal with the rancid stench of death all day. There were a few other parts of the plague doctor outfit that aren't as notorious. They wore a long overcoat to protect their skin. They also wielded a wooden cane that they used to prod their patients without physically touching them. Medieval people may have believed in a lot of weird stuff, but they understood the basic idea of not touching someone who was sick. The Nazi Buddhist statue from space. 1,000 years ago, somebody came across a meteorite. Then they carved a meteorite into the shape of a Buddhist deity. Somewhere along the line, the strange artifact was stolen by Nazis. It's known as the Iron Man, bigger and heavier than it looks in the photographs. It's about 22 pounds. That's pretty hefty for a space rock. Nobody knows exactly who the figure is, though it could be Buddha himself or another Buddhist god. What makes the artifact so creepy is that the figure has a swastika on his midsection. The swastika wasn't creepy when it was carved because, as I'm sure you know already, the swastika is a symbol of good luck and fortune in Buddhism. It was the Nazis who ruined the swastika for everybody. In 1938, Nazis in Tibet came across the statue. They were intrigued by the swastika on the artifact and stole it for themselves. They brought it back to Germany, where it remained in the hands of a private collector until 2007. Only then was it given to scientists for study. The one who analyzed the statue was Elmar Buchner from the Planetary Institute at Stuttgart University. Elmar found the artifact to come from the 11th century. It was carved from a single piece of meteorite that probably landed in Mongolia 15,000 years ago. Napoleon's Hat. How would you like to wear a hat that belonged to legendary French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte? Do you think it's a little creepy to wear a dead man's hat? Or is it something you'd be interested in? If you want this artifact, you just missed your chance. It sold at an auction only days before this video was released for a hefty sum of $2.1 million. The hat is, without knowing its history, nothing but an old bicorn. It's black, decorated with the colors of the French flag, and 200 years old. It was also one of around 120 hats that Napoleon owned. The bicorn was part of his image, worn pretty much everywhere he went for years before his death in 1821. As you might know already, or maybe you've seen the new movie about Napoleon, he crowned himself emperor in 1804. It was the French Revolution that allowed Napoleon to take power, but his subsequent attempt at world domination wasn't very well executed. He was exiled after losing to the British in 1815 at Waterloo. Napoleon died 7 years later on an island in the Atlantic Ocean. Now his creepy old hats are selling for $2 million a pop. Does that feel like a bit much to you? The Hidden Demon. To mark the 300th birthday of a dead painter, the National Trust in Britain conserved 4 fabulous pieces of artwork. During the conservation work, they uncovered that one of the paintings has a hidden demon face in it. The dead painter is none other than Joshua Reynolds, a fabulously talented man active during the 18th century. One of his more unusual works is a painting called The Death of Cardinal Beaufort. It was completed in 1789 and originally included the face of a horrific demon hiding behind the groaning, dying cardinal. But as the years went by, the demonic face gradually disappeared. Now the creepy thing is back. The painting is of a scene from Shakespeare's Henry VI, Part 2. It shows the king standing at the bedside of his great-uncle, Cardinal Beaufort, in the moments before his death. At the time the painting was released, it was hugely controversial. It was totally fine to create an artistic representation from one of Shakespeare's works, but the demon smiling over the cardinal's deathbed rubbed people the wrong way. When it was first shown at the Shakespeare Gallery in 1789, people were outraged. Even though it was only a metaphor, metaphor for the demon inside the cardinal's head, people didn't like it. Then something mysterious happened. Early prints of the painting contained the demon, but by the time second prints started showing up in 1792, the evil face vanished. Conservators had to scrub away layers of varnish to bring the horrible face back to the surface. The Bone Douche. The Nan A. Rothschild Research Center in Midtown Manhattan holds over 1 million archaeological artifacts. They are amazing pieces of history from New York City. There are all kinds of things in the collection, from giant oysters to a particularly bizarre douche. The douche was discovered in 2011, buried behind City Hall. It is an old piece of hygienic equipment made from cow bone. It's smooth, cylindrical, and about the size of a Cuban cigar. The artifact is so random and creepy, it made an appearance on Saturday Night Live after it was found. The unusual relic is so weird that at first archaeologists didn't even know what it was. They thought the douche was a pepper grinder. Inside is a little plunger with small holes at the end. They figured it was for gently distributing pepper. Instead, the cow bone artifact likely belonged to a middle-class woman who valued personal hygiene. Amanda Sutphin from the New York Landmarks Preservation Commission said women of high society used glass douches in the 1800s. Glass offered a more comfortable experience. However, cow bone was cheaper. Whatever the case, it's one of the most obscure artifacts ever found buried in New York City. Incestuous Greeks. The ancient Greeks were rulers of the seas. They came up with beautiful myths and were ahead of the curve when it came to art and science. But they were also really creepy. The Greeks were so disgustingly incestuous, they had no single word for the horrible act. Instead, they had a variety of words that you could use depending on which family member you were going to bed with. For example, the word thagatromixia describes a man sleeping with his daughter. The word metrokoites was used to describe a man sleeping with his own mother. They also had the term gamos anosios to describe people who participated in these acts. The term translates to unholy union. It wasn't until the Romans came up with the word incestum that there was an official name for it. Though to be fair, incestum covered a lot of activities. If the Vestal Virgin lost her sacred virginity, she was accused of incestum. There was even an account in the 1st century BC where a statesman by the name of Clodius Pulcher snuck into a female-only religious ceremony. He did it disguised as a woman because he was a pervert and was charged with incestum. But just how creepy were the Greeks? How many people were actually having relations with their family members? Many of their most important gods were siblings. Zeus was married to his sister Hera. They were the children of Cronus and Rhea, who were also siblings. Some scholars have suggested that because the gods were allowed to participate in these unions, ordinary people thought they should too. Nobody knows just how prevalent the practice was. It was definitely seen as taboo, yet so many ancient works from before Christ centered around stories of incest. If they didn't practice it, they were intrigued by it. It was also legal in ancient Greece to marry your sibling, the kissing lockdown. While I'm on the subject of kissing cousins, let me tell you about a strange time in history. In the late 1430s, the English Parliament begged for permission to stop kissing King Henry VI. It might seem creepy to you now, but kissing the king was a matter of business 600 years ago. Whatever King Henry was doing, it creeped out his constituents so much they tried to usher in a lip lockdown. Henry VI is largely regarded as one of the worst kings in British history. He inherited the throne from his father, King Henry V, as an infant. He was a relatively quiet boy who grew into a fairly quiet king. Most historical documents paint Henry as a sensitive and devout man who only wanted peace. However, he lived during a time of great civil unrest. There was war in his kingdom, plus England had just lost a lot of territory in France. And don't forget about the Black Death that had just finished emptying about half of Europe. The bubonic plague didn't make King Henry's life any better, it just kept showing up. The bubonic plague made an epic comeback in England between 1438 and 1439. People were still under the impression that the plague was divine punishment from God. Some people in society had made the connection between the spread of plague and touching people, but not everybody was thinking scientifically. Now let's get to the juicy part. The kissing. It was called the kiss of homage. It was the traditional way to respect a king or queen. Instead of a handshake, members of parliament were expected to kiss the monarch on their hand or cheek. In 1439, members of Parliament drafted a letter to the king asking if they could please not kiss him. The young King Henry wasn't doing anything creepy, it's just that members of Parliament didn't want to accidentally spread plague. It was the first real instance of social distancing. Which of these creepy and bizarre pieces of ancient history surprised you the most? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe before you go.